Hello, friends. At 10 a.m., under the hard cafe lights, James set a wrapped painting on the table like evidence. His father smiled politely, then named our shop, our resort deal, even James's mother, as if they were strings in his hand. The message still burned on James's screen. Bring what you're hiding. My palms were damp. I could taste bitter coffee and fear. James didn't raise his voice. He only slid the canvas closer and said, "Peace that costs my family isn't peace. If you believe ordinary peace is worth protecting, home, children, quiet mornings, please tap like and subscribe and stay with us today. But to see how we reached that table, we have to return to the morning after he met his father. The morning after James met his father, our house smelled like plain life. Rice steaming, oranges in a neat bowl, and Nee laughing because she'd hidden her spoon under her plate and couldn't find it. Anna sat at the table with her markers lined up. She wrote care cards and careful letters, whispering each line before she let it stay. "Mom," she said, holding one up, "listen. May your day feel quieter inside." "It's beautiful," I told her, and I meant it. James stood behind her, tying her hair back with a rubber band. No rushing, no checking the road. He was here on purpose, as if presence could answer every threat. After breakfast, he fed Nee with patient little airplane noises, praising each swallow like it mattered. Then he carried her to wash her hands, steady as if this was the truest work of being a man. At Hill Fruits, we lifted the gate, wiped the counter, set out the chalkboard, and placed our sealed care card box beside the customer note jar. Normal. For a while, normal held. Luan arrived with crates and a grin that tried to be funny. His eyes still scanned the street. "We're officially a fruit shop with security awareness," he joked. "Don't make it sound like a brand," I muttered. James leaned in. "Let him joke," he whispered. "It keeps fear from feeling important." Customers came. We weighed mangoes, counted bills, smiled at small talk. One older woman slipped a note into the jar and squeezed my wrist. "Your shop feels brighter than the road," she said. I was still holding that warmth when James's phone buzzed. He glanced down once, stepped behind the crates, and answered. His voice stayed respectful, but his face tightened like he'd put on an old uniform. When he returned, he didn't dramatize it. He simply said, "My mother." My stomach dropped. "Is she okay?" "She's okay," he said. Then quieter. He went to see her last night. I felt the word before he spoke it. "Your father." James nodded. He sat there, like a calm storm. He reminded her of the past, like she still owed him. "What did he want?" I asked. James's eyes flicked to the road, then back to me. He told her to tell me this: if we want peace, we should accept his offer. Quiet the shop End the resort deal. No attention. My hands went cold on the counter. He's using her fear. Yes, James said. He's reaching me through her. James turned away again, not to hide, but to protect her. He called James's mother right there behind the crates, voice low and steady. You did nothing wrong, he told her. Don't apologize for being scared. Lock your door. If he comes back, you call me. No conversation, no tea, no polite listening. I'll come. I am not a boy anymore. When he ended the call, his eyes looked older. She's shaking, he admitted. I hate that he can still do that to her. I forced my breath too slow. We don't blame her for being scared, I said. But we don't obey him because she's scared either. Something in James's shoulders eased, just a fraction. I need to talk with you, he said. Not here. Tonight, I promised. The day kept moving because children still needed lunch and customers still needed fruit. Officer Thu passed by once, slow and steady, and when his eyes met, mine, his quiet nod said, I'm watching. At home, Nai demanded banana and refused rice like she was negotiating a treaty. James crouched beside her. 2 bites, he said, serious as a judge. Then, banana! Nai stared him down. 1 bite, then another. Anna giggled so hard she nearly spilled her just markers. For a moment, I remembered why we fight at all. Not for pride, for ordinary joy. Then my phone rang, Ms. Trang. I answered, steady. Hello? Diep, she said. Quick verification, we received a call this morning. Someone claiming to represent a private stakeholder. They questioned your shop's stability and implied the contract might be inconvenient. My throat tightened. That wasn't us. I assumed, she said. Are you still able to deliver next week? Across the room, James was making Nai laugh with a sock. He puppet. He saw my face and went still. Yes, I said firmly. We'll deliver. We're prepared. Good, Ms. Trang replied. Then we proceed. Pick up at your gate 9 a.m. Monday, sealed crates, verification codes, no third-party contact. Relief nearly buckled my knees. Thank you. Do your work, she said. Don't let noise control your pace. When I hung up, James walked to me. That was him, he said. I nodded. He contacted the resort. James exhaled, slow. So he's escalating, politely. That night, the house finally softened into quiet. Anna slept with her notebook open on her chest. Nai curled up, clutching her toy orange like treasure. James and I sat at the kitchen table. The wrapped painting lay there, again, still unopened, still waiting. He won't shout, James said. He'll just tighten the world with phone calls and concern until breathing feels like agreement. I watched his face, tired but clear. What does he want you to agree to? I asked. To be his son again, James said. Not a man, not a partner, not a father. My chest ached. So what do we do? He nodded toward the wrapped canvas. We set one boundary he can't twist, he said. I don't argue about contracts. I don't beg for peace. I show him the truth he tried to erase. The painting, I whispered. James's eyes held mine. And you come with me, he said, like it wasn't a question anymore. Because you're not a weakness. You're proof. We sat in the dark hush, listening to the girls breathe. Then James's phone buzzed again. One message. He set it on the table between us, and we read it together. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. public. Bring what you're hiding. My heart thudded. James's fingers slid to the edge of the wrapped painting. Slow, deliberate. He didn't unwrap it. He only pulled it closer, like a promise he was finally ready to carry. Tomorrow, he said softly. I meet him again. James woke before the sun. Not the restless, haunted kind of waking I'd seen in him before. This was quieter. A man rising because a line had been drawn, and he intended to stand on the right side of it. I found him in the kitchen, fully dressed, hands resting on the wrapped painting like it was a living thing. He looked up when I entered. His eyes didn't ask for permission. They asked for partnership. You sure? I whispered. He nodded once. I'm done letting him decide what peace means. Behind us, the house still breathed softly. The girls were asleep. Anna with her notebook open, Nye curled around her toy orange. That sight almost broke me because it was so ordinary, and ordinary was what we were trying to protect. I poured tea. James didn't drink it. He just sat there, palms flat on the table, staring at the canvas as if he could hear the truth inside it. When the clock crept closer to 10, we didn't make a show of leaving. We moved like parents who still had chores and still had children who would wake hungry. Luan arrived first, knocking twice. Quick, careful. His grin didn't show up. Today, you're really doing this, he said quietly. James lifted the wrapped painting. He asked, James replied, so I'm bringing it. Luan nodded. Officer Thu's making extra rounds, he said. Not obvious, just present. Good, I murmured. We left Anna and Nei with a trusted neighbor for an hour. No dramatic goodbye. Just kisses and the promise that we'd be back before Nye's second snack. As we stepped outside, the shop light from Hill Fruits was still glowing faintly in the morning haze. It felt like a small lighthouse behind us. James glanced at it once. That's home, he said. Yes, I answered. And home doesn't bow. The cafe was exactly as the flash forward had promised. Bright lights, bitter coffee, and the cruel comfort of being in public where a Man could hurt you with words and never raise his voice. James's father was already there. He didn't look angry. He looked arranged. A neat suit. A calm posture. Hands folded like he was waiting for a business meeting, not a son. James's mother sat across from him, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes too alert. The moment she saw James, something in her face tightened with relief and fear, as if she was happy he came and terrified he did. James didn't rush to her, but he didn't ignore her either. He gave her a small nod, the kind that said, "I see you. I'm here." We approached the table. James placed the wrapped painting down between them, gently, like setting a sleeping child in a safe place. His father's gaze slid to the canvas. A faint smile touched his mouth. "So," he said, voice smooth as polished wood. "You brought it." James pulled out the chair and sat. He didn't wait to be invited. I sat beside him, close enough that my knee touched his. A quiet reminder, you're not alone. His father's eyes flicked to me, then back to James. "And you brought company." "I brought my family," James answered. The word landed on the table like a stone. His father's smile didn't move. "Family," he repeated, as if tasting the word for flaws. "Interesting choice, considering the instability around you." James didn't blink. "If you called the resort again," he said, "you'll stop." His father lifted a brow. "I made a professional inquiry." "You tried to sabotage our contract," I said, and my voice surprised even me. Steady, clear. James's father looked at me like I was a small interruption. "Young lady..." "Don't," James cut in softly. The cafe noise continued around us. Spoons clinking, chairs scraping. But our table felt sealed, like air had thickened. His father leaned back. "You're defensive. That tells me you're under pressure. Pressure makes people reckless. I'm offering you a way out. A way back." James corrected. His father's eyes warmed, just a fraction. A way back to stability, to order, to the life you were meant to have. James's jaw tightened. "The life you designed." His father's gaze moved to the wrapped canvas. "Tell me," he said, "is that painting worth losing everything for?" James's mother flinched. I watched. Her hands. Her fingers were clasped too tightly, nails pressing skin. She looked like someone holding her breath in a house that used to be loud. James turned slightly toward her. His voice softened. "Mom," he said, "you don't have to carry this today." Her eyes filled instantly. She shook her head like she was trying to stop tears from being seen. He said he only wanted peace," she whispered. James's father's smile returned, gentle, victorious. "Exactly," he said. "Peace. I'm glad we agree." James looked back at him, and something in his face settled into steel. "No," he said. You're confusing peace with surrender. For the first time, the father's expression tightened, barely, a small crack in his politeness. James rested both hands on the wrapped canvas. "You asked me to bring what I'm hiding," he said. "So here it is." He began to unwrap it, slow, deliberate. My heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears, not because of the painting itself, but because of what it meant. James refusing to stay small. The paper slid away, and there it was, a painting of hill fruits at dusk, the gate open, warm shop light, spilling out like honey. In the doorway, 3 figures, a man, a woman, and 2 children. Not perfect faces, not polished, but unmistakable in posture. One small child reaching for the woman's hand. The man's arm curved protectively behind them. Home, not a mansion, not a legacy, not a corporate skyline. Just us. James's father stared at it. His mother inhaled sharply, a sound that was almost a sob. Her hand rose to her mouth. James's father's smile didn't return. "That," he said slowly, "is sentimental." James nodded. "Yes." His father tapped one finger on the table as if checking patience. "Sentiment doesn't pay bills. Sentiment doesn't protect you when the world turns." James leaned forward. "That shop saved me," he said. "So those kids saved me. She saved me." He looked at me for half a breath. Not romantic, not theatrical. Just truth. Then he faced his father again. "And the only reason you hate this painting," he continued, "is because it proves I can live without your permission." The father's eyes narrowed. "You think you're free," he murmured. "But you're standing on unstable ground. A small shop, a fragile contract. Children you didn't plan for. A woman who—" "Stop," James said again, firmer. His father's voice stayed calm. "Or what?" James didn't raise his voice. He did something more dangerous. He smiled, not a happy smile. A clear one. "Or you'll learn," James said quietly, "that I don't fear losing what you never gave me." A hush seemed to pass over our table. Even the cafe sounds felt distant for a second. James's father studied him, and I realized then, this wasn't a man who punched walls. This was a man who moved pieces. He glanced at James's mother. "Do you hear him?" he asked her. "He's choosing chaos." She flinched as if struck. James turned fully to her. "Mom," he said, softer again. "Look at the painting." She did. Tears fell. Silent. "That light," James whispered, pointing at the warm glow in the doorway. "That's the first place I felt like I could breathe without being measured." His mother's lips trembled. "It's beautiful," she managed. James's father's jaw tightened. "So beauty is irrelevant," he snapped, his first real edge. Then he caught himself and smoothed his tone again. "James, you have 2 choices. You step back into the life that protects you, or you continue this stubborn little performance until it collapses." James's shoulders stayed level. "No," he said. "I have one choice. I protect my family." His father's eyes flicked to me. "And what does she think about dragging you into public conflict?" he asked, voice silky. I didn't look away. "He isn't dragging me," I said. "He's walking beside me." A small muscle in the father's cheek jumped. James's mother suddenly spoke. So quiet. It almost didn't happen. "Please," she whispered to the father. "Let him be happy." The father's face turned toward her slowly, like a door closing. "Happiness is not the point," he said. The sentence landed like a coffin lid. James's mother's shoulders sagged. Something in her eyes shifted, like a child finally seeing that love had always been conditional. James reached across the table, not to grab her, not to pull her, just to place his hand near hers. "You don't have to live like that," he told her gently. His father watched and smiled again, sharp this time. "Careful," he said. "You're making promises you can't keep." James's phone buzzed. He didn't flinch. He turned the screen so we could all see. A new message. Unknown number. "We can make your deliveries fail. We can make your permits reviewed. Last chance to be reasonable." My stomach turned. Cold. Luan had warned us. Quiet threats. Dressed like concerns. James's father glanced at the phone and said, almost casually, "That is what I mean. The world is unpleasant. You need protection." James stared at the message, then set the phone down. "No," he said. "The world is unpleasant when men like you think control is love." His father's eyes darkened. "Watch your tone." James didn't move. "Watch your reach," he replied. And in that moment, I felt it. The invisible line between them had been crossed. Not with shouting, with refusal. James stood. He lifted the painting carefully and wrapped it. Again, not hiding it now, but honoring it. Like you cover something precious before you carry it through rain. He looked at his father. "You don't get to negotiate my life," he said. "You don't get to call my partners. You don't get to intimidate my mother. And you don't get to speak about my family like they're liabilities." His father remained seated, eyes steady. "If you walk away," he said, "you will regret it." James nodded, as if accepting the price. "I've regretted staying small longer than I can regret leaving," he said. Then he turned to his mother. "Come to Hill Fruits," he told her softly. "Not today if you can't. Not tomorrow if you're scared. But when you're ready, the gate will be open." His mother pressed her lips together, trembling. She didn't promise. She couldn't. But she nodded once, a fragile yes. We walked out of the cafe. My knees felt weak only after the door closed. Behind us, outside, the air tasted like freedom and exhaust. James exhaled, shaky for the first time. He held the painting against his chest like armor. "I did it," he whispered. I reached for his hand. "You did," I said, "and you didn't become him to do it." We drove back without talking much because talking would have made it real in a way that might crack us open. At Hill Fruits, the Pachapchah morning sun was higher now. Luan opened the gate. The shop light inside still glowed, faint but stubborn. Officer Thu stood across the road, pretending to look at his phone. When he saw us return, he tipped his chin. A silent promise. "You're not alone." Inside, the girls ran to us the moment. We stepped in. Nye threw her arms around James's leg. "Banana?" she demanded, because life doesn't pause for adult battles. Anna grabbed my hand. "Did it go okay?" she asked, her eyes too wise for her age. James crouched down, painting still in his arm. "It was hard," he admitted. "But we're okay." Anna's gaze fell on the wrapped canvas. "Is that our light?" she whispered. James swallowed. "Yes," he said. "It's our light." Anna nodded, as if that settled something in her bones. We opened the shop. We wiped the counter. We served fruit. A customer dropped a note into the jar. "Thank you for making this road feel kind." I read it, and my throat tightened. Not with fear this time, with the strange, fierce gratitude of people who have been tested and did not break. Later, when the girls were busy coloring behind the counter, James pulled out his phone and typed one message to Miss Trang. "Pickup confirmed. Seals ready, verification codes on arrival. We proceed as scheduled." Then he typed a second message to a number Officer Thu had given us weeks ago, the one for official reporting. We received an intimidation text after a public meeting, screenshot attached. "Please advise next steps." He hit send, not dramatic, not loud, just a man doing the real work of being free. That night, after we closed, James finally brought the painting inside and hung it on the wall, above the kitchen table. Not hidden, not folded away, visible. The girls stared at it like it was a storybook. Namwe pointed. "Me," she said proudly, though her finger landed on the wrong figure. Anna traced the painted shop light with her eyes. "It looks warm," she whispered. "Like when you tuck me in." James's voice caught. "That's what it is," he said. "A reminder." I stood behind him, arms around his waist. I could feel his breath deepen, like the house itself was letting him rest. Outside, the shop light at Hill Fruits glowed through the window. Steady, ordinary. And somewhere, a man with a quiet smile might still be making calls. But inside our home, the truth was no longer wrapped. It was hung up where everyone could see it. And for the first time, I believed something I hadn't dared to believe before. That peace wasn't something we begged for. It was something we built, one ordinary morning at a time.